Today, it is my absolute honor to welcome Dr. Dianne Saxe to this series. Dianne and I met a couple of years ago, and some of you have heard Dianne speak before. She came and spoke to us here in Orillia as part of our Third Age Learning Lakehead series that was called There Is No Planet B. And it was about climate change and really learning a little bit more about what climate change is about. She came here and she came to my house, and I was just so struck by her generosity and her kindness and her incredible breadth of knowledge. We had a great opportunity to have several conversations because we were trying to figure out how to plug in her electric car in my driveway, where I don't have the equipment for that. But she was very patient and helped me sort out how to make sure that she could make her way back to Toronto. And I would say that it really is from that particular incident that I started pushing for technology here on the Orillia campus. And I'm happy to say that, Dianne, next time you come to Orillia, we'll be able to plug in your car in the proper way right here on campus. So I'm excited about that. Dianne she's really central to the ways that we think about climate action here in Ontario. She's done some really incredible work in this area. Between 2015 and 2019, she was the Environment Commissioner of Ontario, and that position suddenly came to an end under our current government. And at that point, she started a SaxeFacts, where she continues her important work as a consultant and as a lawyer, advocating for policy related to climate change. She is also now the deputy leader of the Green Party of Ontario, something that I actually didn't know when I asked her to come and speak at this series. But I think it's going to add another layer to her discussion with us here today. So Dianne, I'm so excited to hear from you, and I'll turn it over to you now to talk about climate action right here in Ontario.
Well, thank you so much, Linda, and certainly in terms of kindness and generosity, you have always been that. So yes, I am now, among other things, I am still a practicing lawyer, but if I was here with my lawyer's hat, I'd be charging you a lot more money. So I'm here with my Green Party hat on to talk about what would a practical climate environmental plan for Ontario look like right now. And your timing is great, because after many months' work, we released this climate plan last week. It was what I spent a great deal of the year writing. So the first question is, why am I devoting myself to climate? You'll see on the screen, some of you have seen this before, how much of the space to 1.5 degrees has been used up in our lifetime, so you can watch it happen. This is last year, and basically we're already almost there to 1.5. Well, does that matter? Well, absolutely it does matter. I've got another slide in a moment, but the short answer is that we do know that once we get past 1.5, we've really risked going over many tipping points. The chance of a stable climate is very much reduced. Human and natural systems may start to collapse. The risk of extreme events is much greater. I mean, look how extreme the last year has been already. Even in Canada, with cherries cooking on the trees in Western Canada, a billion animals dying on the beaches of the Pacific coast, wildfires and events that weren't predicted to be occurring for decades yet, they're here already. So, as you mentioned, I was the last environmental commissioner of Ontario, and that really was what turned me to focusing on climate. Before that, I had spent more than 40 years as an environmental and energy lawyer, and honestly, as I said to you, I thought I had a pretty good handle on how bad things are, and I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked when I became commissioner and went to the first climate conference in 2015 at how bad things are. So I don't know about you folks, but there's some young people I care about. There's two of them. And we know that their lives are going to be dramatically different because of the decisions we're making right now. My youngest grandson will only be 28 when 2050 arrives. He'll be at the age where he'd like to be, finding a partner, finding his professional path in life, maybe looking for a home. And the world is going to be so different for him because of what we've done during my working lifetime and what we're doing right now. And I can't look them in the face unless I do everything I can. So that's why I'm doing this. For those of you who've been paying attention, you saw that this summer we had a code red pronounced for global planetary health. What I still think is the largest scientific collaboration in human history is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's the work of thousands of the world's best climate scientists, all of whom volunteer vast amounts of unpaid time on top of their regular jobs in order to give the governments of the world the clearest possible factual basis for deciding what to do. And what they've said is, we're in real serious trouble. Many of the changes that have occurred are now irreversible. We have a very small window left, to try to give our kids anything like the kind of stable world that we've had. We reached the point where we need to be cutting our emissions in half every decade, which is technically possible, but really difficult.
I'm sorry, I wouldn't normally interrupt you, but we're actually hearing from a couple of our participants that they're having trouble hearing you. And I'm just wondering if we can turn up the volume on your microphone a little bit. I've tried to do some things on the back end here, but I don't think it's possible. So.
Oh, I am so sorry, because at home I have a professional microphone, but here I'm just using the computer. All right, if I try to sit closer, is that any better, Linda?
Yes, it is better. And I'm actually not having this problem, but a couple of people have mentioned it. So I would just encourage everyone to turn up the volume on your computers to your maximum capacity. And sure, Diane, if you can just lean in a little bit, then we'll do what we can here. And remember, everyone, we always do closed caption the lectures after the fact. And so we will make sure that, that you do have the opportunity to see that in the closed caption version later if necessary. So sorry for the interruption there, Diane, but
thank you for telling me there's no point in me talking to people if they can't hear. So anyway, we have this choice. We really are at a fork in the road where if we continue doing basically nothing different, we are heading towards catastrophe fast. And if we do things different, well, we can have a better life than now. And we can have a lot of the benefits soon. This isn't anymore just about polar bears or people who aren't born yet or things that are going to happen far away, although they will all be affected. It's also about things that we can make better here right now. Okay. So when we think about this, it's important to remember that there is a huge difference between, in terms of the ambition. And this is again from the work of the IPCC. A little bit of history. In 1992, all the governments of the world agreed to a treaty. It's a climate change treaty, the International Framework Convention on Climate Change. And at the time, based on the science that was clear in the 1980s, and some of you will remember when James Hansen went to Washington to testify about this, it was really clear then that letting the world heat more than 2 degrees was going to be dangerous for people. It was going to be dangerous for our food supplies, for global peace, for migration, for many other kinds of things. And so the treaty that was signed in 1992 by all the countries of the world, we all agreed that we were going to reduce our carbon emissions to stay below 2 degrees, which we didn't do. By 2015, at the Paris climate talks, which is where I became the environmental commissioner of Ontario and had my socks blown off, a lot of the more vulnerable countries in the world, especially the small island nations, the low-lying places like Bangladesh, it has a quarter of its population basically at sea level, were pushing for a scientific assessment as to whether 2 degrees was really okay. And they argued that the world should be striving for 1.5 degrees, not 2 degrees. And so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was assigned to do a special report to answer that question. I mean, how much worse is 2 degrees than 1.5 degrees of heating? And the answer was a lot worse. Large, widespread, robust differences, particularly in things like heavy precipitation, extreme heat, drought, which historically has been what brought down civilization after civilization, sea level rise, huge percentage of the world's population lives at sea level or very close to it or is dependent on things at sea level. And fundamentally, the ability of human and natural systems to adapt. So this was the report that told us if we can stay at 1.5 degrees, most human and natural systems will be able to cope. There'll be lots of difficulty, there'll be lots of suffering, but by and large, the world as we know it can cope. We get past 1.5 degrees, that's no longer true. So that's where our plan starts. I can get this to move. So we have to start again by thinking about where Canada is in the world. We have this huge space, but a very tiny population. And of that population, Ontario is 38%. This is a map you folks don't need. I put it in mostly because I'm doing this presentation at the COP in a couple of days. But what you might not know as well is how is our climate pollution distributed across Canada? Now you can see that Ontario, we have 38% of the population, about 39% of GDP, gross domestic product, and we have now about 22% of the country's greenhouse gas emissions. Well, why? So first of all, you've seen that since 2005, Ontario emissions did drop quite a bit. Does anybody know why? There's 1.5 answers. Point for either one. Number one, we closed the coal plants. In 2005, we still made about 22% of our electricity from burning coal. So those of you with good memories will remember when you drove into Toronto in those days, there was a yellow smear right across the horizon. Does anybody remember that? And there were 53 smog days in 2005. Now, my husband had asthma. Those were brutally, brutally hard days. There's nearly 1 million Ontarians with asthma. And that had a huge health toll. And so the public health organizations of the province galvanized people that this was an outrageous toll on our lungs, on our infrastructure, on our clothes. You hung your clothes out, they got dirty. The buildings all get dirty. Remember, everything was coated with grime. That was because of the coal. It wasn't an accident. And so in the 2003 election, all of the parties pledged to get coal out of Ontario's power, not because they gave a damn about climate, but because people wouldn't put up with breathing the filth, which everybody could see. Now, none of the parties knew how to do it. And in fact, there were lots of problems because by 2005, in addition to the fact that we were filthying the air and our lungs and our kids with coal, we also weren't sure how to keep the lights on. They were developing emergency plans to put barges in Toronto Harbor with diesel generators on it, just keep the lights on in the city. But nevertheless, between 2005 and 2014, we significantly upgraded our electrical system and took all the coal out, which is why the air got so much cleaner, asthma dropped, and our climate pollution went down. Now, our electricity prices also went up, mostly because of nuclear. But anyway, that's what happened there. But you can see what happened in Alberta was basically the reverse, that Alberta's emissions have gone up and gone up dramatically, and so that they are now 38% of the greenhouse gases of Canada, and most of that is from the oil sands. Now, when you put all that together, these stats from 2019. So by then, Ontario had already closed all our coal plants. That was the single largest climate pollution reduction in North America until that time. And even so, we're still one of the worst than 99% of the global population per capita. And as a country, we're one of the worst countries in the entire world. So it's not just per capita problem, even though we have a tiny population, we have a huge climate footprint. We are one of the worst climate polluters in the world. And part of that is from the oil sands for sure. But also part of that, some of you will remember, those of you who came to my talk a couple of years ago, Who drives the most climate polluting vehicles in the entire world? Hands up, please. It's Canada. So we have a number of habits and features of our economy that make us some of the worst climate polluters in the world. Now, as I say, our first big win was taking electricity out, and you can see that on this chart. You can see the blue line is the carbon emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions from our electricity, and it went way down when we opened the Darlington nuclear plant because we burned the coal less. Then when we had problems at the nuclear plants and we turned the coal up, the air got so filthy, we were really lucky in Ontario that the air got filthy fast enough for people to notice it. If it had been slow, they might not have noticed it. But because it got filthy so fast, people reacted, and then we closed the coal plants. And so our electricity emissions went way down. But what happened to everything else? It's basically the same. Transportation emissions went up. We have basically made no progress on anything else. So that's where we are today. We are approximately 4 decades after the science of climate change was clear. We are very close to potential of real cascading tipping points. We know that if we get past 1.5 degrees, we're putting not just our kids. I mean, Gary Boda said this at a talk a few years ago, that when he started his climate work, he was worried about his granddaughter, but now he realizes it's already affecting us. We can't count on dying on time anymore. 3 things we need to do. We need to crush climate pollution. We need to restore water and nature. We need to find a way to succeed together so we're not leaving people behind. So these are the key pieces that we have to do to cut climate pollution, and I'm going to walk through those one at a time. So the first thing we need to do is to find a way, well, we need a legal framework. We need a way to put an actual boundary on our pollution, because if we don't have to stop, we don't. And that's where I went back to, okay, 1.5 degrees. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in their 1.5 degree report, and again in their Code Red report this summer, has told us over and over again, if we want even a 50-50 chance, I mean, I don't know if you would bet your children on a 50-50 chance, or your grandchildren, but that's where we're at. If we want a 50-50 chance of our grandchildren having a fairly stable climate, not a lot worse than now, the most we can emit from now to the end of the century is about 10 times what we're doing now. So in Ontario, last measured greenhouse gas emissions is 163 megatons. 10 times that is 1,630. So if you see the little picture of the bathtub in the upper right-hand corner, well, that's what I'm talking about. You can see the bathtub represents the atmosphere. As you can see, it's already mostly full. The blue represents the climate pollution that people have already put out. And as I showed you, Canada is one of the big polluters in that bathtub. So the space that's left is basically the absorptive capacity of the atmosphere and the oceans to keep taking carbon. And so our share of that, arguably our fair share of that, the highest possible arguable fair share of that, how's that for Ontario, would be 1,630 tons. Unless I know there's lots and lots of reasons to say that's too much, that's too greedy of ours. But anyway, let's start with that. Can we stay within that? And I think we should. So, so the Green Party drafted a private members bill, which was introduced last week, that Ontario should adopt a fair share carbon budget based on the science of the IPCC, and that we should not, between now and the end of the century, release net more than 1,630 megatons. And you will not be surprised to hear that on Monday this week, the Ford government voted that down. They are not prepared to accept a fair share of the remaining absorptive capacity of the planet. But in any event, the rest of my plan assumes that we do agree to stay within our fair share, and then what will we do with it? And think of it as the same way you would a financial budget. You only have so much. Now, I think there's a lot of reasons why we would want to spread this budget out for as long as we can. In particular, we'd like to have more than 20 years in which we can still doing some net emissions, because there's many parts of our economy which will be really difficult to decarbonize completely. Agriculture is one. Steel making's pretty hard. Some of the chemical areas, there's a lot of areas of the economy where, we know how to do it, but so far it's really difficult and really, really, really expensive, cripplingly so, as opposed to other parts of the economy where in fact we'll be better off. So my concept of this is we should be spread in the same way that if you only have so much money in your financial budget, you spend less now so that the money will last as long as possible. Well, we should be doing the same thing with our carbon budget, and this is how I propose that we should do it. You'll see there's 3 colors on the chart. First of all, at the largest piece is the light green. So light green is the climate pollution that we get from burning fossil fuels, coal, gasoline, so-called natural gas, for energy. And right now, that's the vast majority of our climate pollution, but we have alternatives for most of that. By and large, we can replace most of that with electricity. So that's one thing we can dramatically reduce. The second part of our current emissions is the dark green, and this represents emissions that come from things that are not related to energy. And on average, those are much harder to reduce. So you'll see that I have them reducing, but not nearly as fast because they're really, really hard to do. And then there's a sort of golden color at the bottom, which is offsets. And I'll talk about offsets in a minute. So this is a plan, this is a budget for net zero. Now, what is net zero? Now, there's a lot of greenwashing going on about net zero. And certainly, if you look at the federal government website, Mr. Trudeau has announced all kinds of targets, but he's defined them as net zero. And if you look at his site, as his website, what he explains net zero, there's no legitimate net zero there. The 2 examples he gives is, okay, we're going to plant trees, and we're going to have businesses capture the carbon dioxide at their smokestack and sequester it. So neither of those are net zero. Trees are not net zero, don't get us to net zero, because although it's really important for us to plant trees, really, really important, especially if we plant the right trees and look after them, it's not permanent. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change at the moment is accepting that anything that's out of the atmosphere reliably for 100 years will count as sequestration, even though, our grandchildren could certainly be alive in 100 years, but, or their kids. But we know that the trees are burning. And California is one of the prime examples where they have allowed many industries to so-called offset their emissions by buying forestry credits. And a lot of those forests have already burned. And the hotter the world gets, the more likely those forests are to burn. So saying that planting trees is a real net zero is, as far as I'm concerned, greenwashing. The second example that the federal Liberals give on their website is that, okay, if an industry captures the carbon dioxide at the discharge point from its smokestack and does something with it, okay, that's sequestration. Well, first of all, it's not, because it never got into the atmosphere. That's just how the industry reduces its emissions. But what they do with it, some of it's permanent and some of it isn't. Most of the captured carbon dioxide, or a lot of it right now, is used in ways that get back to the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide is used to stun animals when at a slaughterhouse. Well, that just then gets released to the atmosphere. A lot of the carbon dioxide is being used to pump into oil fields to produce more oil, and it may not stay permanently down there. So there's no legitimate examples of permanent sequestration in the federal plans. But we recognize that we are going to have some emissions by 2045, probably, unless we're really lucky. So we're going to need some offsets. And the good news is there are some plausibly permanent offsets that genuinely take carbon out of the atmosphere. And the two that I know of are biochar and cross-laminated timber. And both of these can be bought today. Both of them are made in Canada as well as in other places. Biochar, it basically is made much the same as some kinds of the charcoal that people use in barbecues, except it's done at high temperature without oil going back to it, and you end up with a very fine-grained black substance with a really high surface area, which is wonderful for improving soils. I just dug some of it into my garden. And when it's in the ground, it's likely to stay there a very long time. Some of the Inca biochar has been found thousands of years old. It degrades very, very slowly in the ground. Similarly, cross-laminated timber, I don't know what it was like in Orillia, but certainly in Toronto 100 years ago, a lot of buildings were built with mass timber, brick and timber, and they're some of the best loved buildings that we have even now. And but the timber was from cutting down old growth trees, which we mustn't do anymore. But we can make mass timber just as strong, in fact, possibly stronger as the old growth trees by taking thin slices of wood from second growth trees, little trees, and laying them on cross grain to each other and gluing and squishing them together. And you can make big mass timbers, which again are likely to be both in buildings and usable and reusable for more than 100 years. So there are some things that are legitimate, but most of the ones people talk to you about are not. So where would we get our reductions from in this kind of a carbon budget? Well, I mean, I don't pretend to have a crystal ball, but this is my best guess. So the left side of the chart, we're looking at how we use fossil fuels for energy right now. And my guess is that by 2045, and to stay within our fair share carbon budget and to make it last as long as possible, we have to get all the carbon emissions out of transport. We have to get 90% of them out of industry. We have to get all of them out of buildings, residential and commercial. We have to get all of them out of electricity generation, and we have to get all of them out of vehicles being driven around in agriculture. The non-energy uses, my best guess is we can, by 2045, hope to have half. Agriculture, waste, industrial processes, fugitive emissions, and then you'll see we were going to cope with that by having at least that same amount of offsets. And the examples I gave you were biochar and cross-laminated timber, and hopefully there will be others. So how do we achieve all that? Let's say I hope you're with me so far that we shouldn't be using more than our fair share of what's left, given that we have ravaged the atmosphere for basically our whole lives. What kinds of policies can transform our economy so that we stay within that budget? Well, the first thing we need is a carbon fee. We need a big carbon fee. We have one now. It's going up $15 a year right now. That's probably not enough given how short the time frame is for, remember, we have to be cutting our emissions in half every decade now. That's extraordinarily fast. So we need a carbon fee. It needs to go up. It needs to go up fast. It's the policy of the Green Party that carbon fees paid by individuals should still be going back to individuals. So we'll still have a carbon fee and dividend, which still means that most families, and particularly lower income families, will get more back from the dividend than they pay. But really heavy users will pay more. And then we capped it at $300 because there's been a lot of research. $300 is probably a fair number. Then we need to, and we know a carbon price can do a lot of the heavy lifting, but it's also really clear that it can't do the whole thing by itself. So the next thing we need to do is think about our energy. Remember, most of the emissions come from burning fossil fuels for energy, and we have to stop that. We have to completely stop it. And the short answer is we're going to stop it by doubling electricity production. Now, there's a lot of advantages to that. Ontario spends roughly 16 to $25 billion every single year just importing fossil fuels. And that means we're tied to the international fuel markets, which we don't control. So it's great for us when prices go down, Everybody thinks it's wonderful. When prices go up, everybody has pain and complaints, and that's where we're at right now. The international market's going up. Certainly, Mr. Putin is doing some squeezes for political advantage. If we stop being so dependent on sending our money to other people, we can keep that money here, we can keep the jobs here, and we can be unaffected by the geopolitical games that are going on other places. And the fact is we can do that, and we can do that keeping the air clean if we double electricity with renewables and storage and green hydrogen. And the short answer is, so I was very, very fortunate is that a professional electricity system modeler who's got one of the best computer models of Ontario's economy and electricity system of anybody in the province volunteered a vast amount of time to work this out for me. And this is what he says is the least expensive, most practical way we could do this. We have to double solar, wind, and storage by 2026. We have to triple them again by 2030. And we have to start now to plan the transmission lines, especially with Indigenous communities, because we're not going to be able to have a cleaner future without more transmission lines. And it's hard to get permission to build transmission lines. As some of you know, I started with the Ontario government after a short career downtown with the downtown law firm. I moved to the Ontario government in January of 1975. And my very first project was working on a transmission line, and that project took 30 years to build. We don't have 30 years to wait for new transmission lines. So it's got to be part of our reconciliation conversation with Indigenous communities. And I think it's also really clear that we shouldn't be building new nuclear. We have, I'll be glad to come back to that if anybody likes, but we shouldn't be building nuclear for financial reasons. We shouldn't be building it for safety reasons. We don't have any place to put the waste from the nuclear plants we've been operating since 1971. I had the privilege as commissioner to actually stand in the warehouse between the jars of the waste that we've been building up all these years. And the most terrifying thing about it is those jars were designed by very careful and competent engineers to last 50 years. And now some of them are 50 years old. We've got nowhere to put them. We've got no way to rejar them. We've got no way to protect them. We're just sitting there hoping that the engineering is going to continue to be good long enough for us to come up with something to do with it. And this is waste that will be poisonous to our children and our grandchildren and our great-great-grandchildren for at least 100,000 years. I mean, I think it's a more. And we don't need to do it anymore. We need to keep operating the nuclear plants that we have, at least unless they get into real serious problems with the fuel tube leakage. But renewables are becoming cheaper and cheaper. Storage is becoming cheaper and cheaper. And we have great innovators in Ontario that I hope I get a chance to talk to you about. Once we dramatically increase our electricity production, and if we get smart about moving electricity use off peak, because we use more than twice as much on peak as we use off peak, which is craziness, we can electrify everything practicable, which is most of those things I showed you on the chart about where we're going to get our reductions. We can electrify most transportation right now. We can electrify most buildings right now. This doesn't require magic. We know how to do it. We just have to do it. And once we have the clean electricity, then we can also clean the air and our climate pollution by electrifying things. We need to get fossil fuels out of our electricity system, and we can realistically do it by 2035. We should not be building any new gas pipelines, and we should be closing really dangerous ones like Line 5, which again, I hope I get a chance to talk about later. And we have to think about the diesel dependent communities. We have more diesel dependent communities in Ontario than I think anywhere else in the country. And it's bad for their air quality, bad for their health, very, very expensive, and increasingly unsafe because they have to truck the diesel in on the ice roads, and the ice roads are disappearing. So they need another way to get electricity. And many of them are really anxious to have renewable energy, and more of them are building it. And we can help with that. So this is the electricity system, a simplified picture of the model. As you can see, we have a steady amount of hydro in Ontario. This is water power. There is still some capacity, a small capacity to increase water power production in Ontario, but on the other hand, climate change makes the production of hydro when we need it the most less reliable. So, I mean, on balance, I don't see that changing very much. Nuclear, as you can see, is basically going to be pretty steady. There's some dips in the short run because of the refurbishment of the nuclear plants that's underway right now. And of course, the Pickering nuclear plant is going to shut by 2026. And it's, I think, now the oldest nuclear plant in North America and the closest to a major population center. So certainly we think it should close, then shouldn't be extended again. It wouldn't be safe to extend it again. And it doesn't make financial sense to extend it again either. So most of the electricity growth has to come from wind. Wind technology has been steadily improving. The towers are taller, they get into stronger winds, you need fewer towers, and they can coexist with many, many other land uses. We do need to significantly increase solar. There's lots of places we can put solar, but and solar also is really, really helpful for the summer peak, which is when we get a lot of demand right now. And in many places, adding solar adds benefits. You're not damaging things around it, you're benefiting things around it. So I can come back to that if you like. And but you'll see that the demand line, the black line, is lower than the total of production. So you might ask me, why are we doing that? Well, we're doing that because we have to have storage. We have to have storage so that when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, we've got enough ability to create electricity without having to crank up fossil gas again. And that means we have to have some extra, there's some inefficiency when you create electricity and then put it in storage and then take it out again. So that's what the surplus is for. I can't see anybody, so I don't know whether this makes sense, but Linda, if there's a problem at any point, please do interrupt me again and let me know. I'm working on a fairly small screen, so I'm not also looking at people's faces. So then we get to transportation. So I think, those of you anyway who came to my talk last time know that transportation is our largest source of climate pollution in Ontario, and it's our fastest growing. And again, this is something that we have designed into our province by the way we have done land use planning. We have to reverse that. We have to go back to a world where much less transportation is done by personal vehicle. So we have to triple transit use by 2030. We need to make walking and biking much, much safer, and we have to do it in a way that as much as possible accommodates seniors and the disabled and other folks, and there's an increasing sophistication on how to do that. But we need to electrify basically all the older buses. So you might know we've got about 7,000 transit buses in Ontario. We need to increase that. We need at least another 4,000 transit buses. But we've got I think I'm remembering correctly that we have 22,000 school buses. I could be wrong. It might have been 17. Anyway, we got a heck of a lot of school buses, an awful lot more school buses than we have transit buses. Well, who goes in the school buses? You probably know the answer to that. And kids have smaller lungs. They're more sensitive to pollution. And any pollutants that go into the lungs do more damage because they have a lot more years there to do damage and to trigger cancer and other things later on in life. Well, we have a lot of really old buses, and particularly anything that was built before 2008, when the bus standards were improved, create a tremendous amount of pollution. If you think about it, who gets exposed the most to that pollution? Well, some of it goes to the people driving behind the bus, but most of it goes to the driver and to the kids. The kids are on the bus, the door is opening and closing with the bus running, and then the bus is idling outside kids' home and outside school. And so the diesel exhaust particularly adversely affects kids. So one of the win-win-wins here is to quickly electrify all the oldest school buses so that we're not poisoning the kids. School buses are almost perfectly designed for electrification because you don't run them all day. You run them in the morning and then you park them for a while, so it's easy to charge them again. And similarly, you run them later in the day. So, so that's an opportunity to really help deal with a number of things we care about at once. And in addition, it helps level out the demand for electricity. One of the reasons our electricity costs so much, as I mentioned earlier, is that we have this huge variation in demand, so that we have lots of extra electricity available on the nights and weekends, and we end up having to throw it away or give it away, or get almost nothing for it. We would have a much less cost per kilowatt hour if we used all our electricity at night, and electrifying vehicles is a great way to use some of that up. So when we do all of those things, we're tripling transit use. And one of the key ways to do that is with dedicated bus lanes. You'll see that I didn't put anything in here that's going to take a lot of time because we don't have a lot of time. So I didn't put in here, we're going to build new subways because that takes 15 years. We don't have 15 years. But what we can do really quickly is buy electric buses and put in dedicated bus lanes. And when you have a dedicated bus lane, the bus is faster and more reliable and more timely than driving. And when you have an electric bus, it's quieter, it's more comfortable, it doesn't vibrate as much, you can easily have Wi-Fi, so you can make bus transportation fast, reliable, and comfortable, and you also make it less expensive to operate. So, so we can do a lot with transit fairly quickly. We need to help people convert to electric vehicles. We need widespread electric vehicle charging. As Linda said, when I drove up to Orillia, the only place I could plug in my car was to run an extension cord in her driveway into her house, which was very kind of her, but it's not an efficient way of getting widespread electric vehicles. Cars, trucks, bikes, and these are spreading all over. I was delighted to see that Sudbury now has 4 electric emergency measures vehicles that they're using, and which again, people really like. We need to make it cheaper to buy electric vehicles and more expensive to buy fossil fuel vehicles. So a fee bait would be the way we would do that. Basically, you charge a fee on the high polluting vehicles and use that money. The government doesn't keep the money, use that money to give people incentive at the front end of buying a clean vehicle. And by 2030, we need to ban the sales of new fossil fuel cars and trucks. Cars and trucks last 10, 15 or more years, and we've got to be off them before 2045. There have to be no new highways, no more sprawl. And the cost of driving a fossil fuel vehicle will go up. It'll go up from a carbon price, it'll go up from road pricing, it'll go up because parking has to get more expensive. When we need to cut our pollution half in a decade, we have reached the point where we can't do things anymore by voluntary action or little nudges. We're going to have to do this. Seth Klein's book is wonderful, The Good War, if you haven't read it. He pointed out that with only 11 million people, Canada transformed our economy and became a real powerhouse in the Second World War in a hurry. And it was done by government leadership. We all have to do this, and we have to do it now. And we did. And we can do the same for climate. And if we don't, we're all going to pay. Buildings is the next highest source of our climate pollution. And again, we have to stop installing new gas-fired anything by 2025. And now this isn't just my idea. The International Energy Agency, which was set up by the Western world to make sure that we all still had oil after the oil price shocks in the 1970s, they came out with their major report this year to say, listen, if we want a 1.5 degree world, which of course we know we do, this is one of the things we have to do. We cannot allow any more new gas-fired, long operating equipment to be installed because we have to stop using it. We need a fossil gas footprint standard so that the gas that we do use, for as long as we use it, has to be much cleaner than it is now. And there are many opportunities for the gas companies. Right now, for example, they can simply ignore any carbon dioxide or methane that is vented from the wells. They just ignore it completely. They don't even pay a carbon price on it. This is outrageous, and it means that the carbon footprint of so-called natural gas is much worse than they let on, and it doesn't have to be. We need the building code so that new buildings by 2028 are net zero and resilient and minimize the embodied carbon. We have to retrofit a huge number of the existing buildings to net zero. And the great news about this is that this will create hundreds of thousands of jobs. At least that was the estimate by Corporate Knights. Ralph Torrey and Celine Back did a major series of reports last year, Building Back Better. And what they showed is right now retrofitting buildings is expensive. I mean, I've just gone through changing the windows in my house and it was ludicrously expensive. But it seemed to me that every 110 years or so, you ought to change the windows. What Ralph Torrey's study showed is that the reason that it's so expensive to retrofit a house right now is we're doing it bespoke. It's like having a custom made suit, like very nice, but very expensive. If we did it in bulk, if we did thousands of buildings at a time, it would be very cost effective. And at the same time, we would be creating these hundreds of thousands of jobs, which would stay here because you have to retrofit a building here. So this helps another way of keeping our money at home instead of sending it to Saudi Arabia and to the fracking fields in the United States. We can create jobs here, make the buildings more comfortable, dramatically reduce operating costs. And one of the things we need to be focusing on is social housing for a number of reasons. Part of it's fairness, but part of it is these are terrible buildings. By and large, social housing was built cheap and assuming that the operating costs were somebody else's problem because the capital cost for building these buildings comes out of a different bucket than the operating costs. So they were just generally built cheap and ignoring the operating costs. So when I was in Sudbury, one of the places I got to tour was two of the buildings, the social housing buildings that were like that. They were thrown up cheap. They were very expensive to operate. And worse than that, they were uncomfortable buildings for the people who lived there because they had a centrally controlled furnace. And by and large, one unit was always freezing and one unit was always baking and the other people in between. And there wasn't anything the operators could do about it. And it cost them a fortune to heat the buildings. So they were able to, they got $100,000 from the cap and trade money and were able to substantially upgrade these two buildings. What they told us is they cut their operating costs in half. They spent their $100,000 buying things from small Ontario businesses. And for the first time since the buildings were built, they were able to provide a decent, dignified temperature in those units for every single unit in those buildings. And those are the kinds of things we can do. We need to see a big build out of geothermal. And this is another example that, sorry, what I was trying to say about their experts. So we bring the cost down dramatically if we scale it up dramatically. How do we get scale? Scale is where government is really good. Government can do a lot of things fast, as we showed in the Second World War. And so a real kickstart push from the government to get this going will create the market pull for innovators to produce all the products that are needed, for people to go to school to get the training that they need. And we provide some support for the training. And once it gets going, the government doesn't have to keep pushing because it's going to make more and more financial sense. But we need to give that initial push. Same thing with geothermal. Geothermal is still quite expensive to install right now. It makes a lot of sense over time. And with geothermal heat pumps, you don't have to worry about backup electric baseboard. Right now, the problem with an air source heat pump is that, well, sometimes it's really, 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 really cold outside and air source heat pumps are very inefficient when it's really, really cold. So you also have to install baseboard heaters, which means the electrical system has to be designed for baseboard, and that can all get very expensive. Whereas geothermal, you're taking heat or cold from the ground where basically the temperature is always about the same. And so geothermal is a much better long-term solution. But geothermal is really expensive to install. Unless you're already digging a hole for some reason. So one of the things we can do, again, we need scale to get this started. It needs government kickstart to bring the cost down, to bring up experience, to increase the number of providers. And one of the best ways to start with that is to put geothermal in 100 schools. Schools have several things where we also get benefits. First of all, we're talking about kids again. So burning gas indoors is bad for indoor air quality. It's bad for kids' health. It's much better for kids' health to get fossil fuels out of those buildings. So we have a health benefit from putting in geothermal instead. And the operating costs will be less over time, which is good for the school operating budget. And schools have a big outdoor area where you can put the geothermal grid, and it's cheaper to make a horizontal grid than it is a deep vertical grid. And a lot of the schoolyards are old and still have a lot of asphalt, and it would be better for the kids to be renaturalizing the schoolyard. So if you're going to dig the schoolyard up anyway, that's when you can put your geothermal in quite inexpensively. So a way of kickstarting a lot of public benefits. We need to provide access to low interest funding for retrofits, which again, we can do that, something where government can help kickstart things. And we've got property assessed clean energy funding that gives us a way to do that. Some of you might have seen my article on that in Corporate Knights a couple of months ago. One specific thing we have to think about is people who are low income and relying on baseboard heating. So these are the scary stories you see in the newspaper every so often, people whose electricity bills are in 4 figures and are terrifying them, and they're sitting in the cold because they can't heat their houses. There's 16% of Ontarians, well, when I did my electricity report, still heated their homes with electricity, almost all of that with baseboard heating, and a lot of those are in old leaky houses. So the Conservatives deal with that by subsidizing electricity. We're spending $6 billion or so a year subsidizing electricity costs, and most of the benefit of that goes to high-income families. And the explanation is we've got to help these low-income folks with their baseboard heating. This makes no sense. What we should be doing is providing public funds to insulate those houses, make them efficient so they need a lot less heating, but then tear out the baseboards and put in heat pumps, or at least leave the baseboards only as backup, because the heat pumps, even an air source heat pump, is 3 times as efficient as baseboard heating. So you use 1/3 the electricity immediately. Yeah, so that would help with electricity. And I think I'm taking way too much time. Yeah, I'm going way too slow on this, so I'm going to have to go faster. Things we can do on materials and products. Again, electrifying everything practical. We're going to need grants and a climate bank for clean tech. There's lots of things we can do about that. We need to do a lot more about protecting water and nature. We need to bring nature back in schools. One of the things, particularly thinking about the Indigenous land acknowledgement we started with, is thinking about protecting natural areas. Now, you're probably aware that we have an international commitment to protect 25% of Ontario's natural ecosystems by 2025 and 30% by 2030. We were supposed to be at 17% by 2020, and we didn't do it. We're nowhere near it. Well, every additional percent, we're talking about 1 million hectares. That isn't going to happen in Southern Ontario, and isn't going to happen by buying small areas of precious land. The only realistic prospect for protecting these kinds of areas is to make this part of our reconciliation, to work with Indigenous communities to help them establish Indigenous protected and conserved areas, to then recognize their jurisdiction over those areas. And we've provided $1 billion in our plan to support Indigenous climate leadership, including to help them set up and manage these Indigenous protected and conserved areas, which will again benefit all of us and the wild creatures with whom we share this province. We need to reward climate smart farmers. We need to reduce air and water pollution, especially in the worst areas. And we need to get full cost pricing so that which is what Mr. Justice O'Connor recommended so many years ago, so we can finally get into properly protecting our water. And we need to find a way to do all of this in ways that improves equity and doesn't reduce it. So here are some of the key things we've put in for that. We've adapted the Justice 40 initiative in the United States to a requirement that we should aim for 25% of the benefits of all this work to go to disadvantaged communities, including Indigenous communities, a specific cash climate bonus for the lowest income households. We need a green workforce. And so one thing is to provide a year of free college training and a year of guaranteed work for people to get into green retrofits, these new things that we really are desperately short of properly trained people to do. We need to put green strings on money the government hands out to municipalities and businesses, and we need to have money and a plan for adaptation, especially for the most vulnerable, because climate impacts are here already and getting rapidly worse. So there's lots more details in the plan, including using a Canadian Index of Well-being instead of GDP as the key measure of government success. It's all available on our website. So all of that is about what the provincial government should be doing. And it doesn't matter what party they are, any party that was serious about climate, that took seriously what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has told us about the remaining carbon budget, we've got to do all of those things. But the provincial government can't do it by itself. The federal government has a larger regulatory jurisdiction, and they get most of the tax money that's collected in Canada. So these are some critical things the federal government has to do. The most important being border carbon adjustments. Is they've got to set a rule that if we push our steel producers, for example, to reduce their carbon footprint, which they're willing to do, or our concrete producers, well, then they can't, it's going to cost more. And they can't be bankrupted by cheap Chinese steel being dumped into the country. And this is something only the federal government can do, the province can't. The federal government has to use its procurement power. The federal government spends enormous amounts of money every year. If they put procurement standards, they will only buy cleaner products, they will generate a wave of innovation and production to meet those requirements. They need to help with financial support. They need to help with their regulations. There's a lot of areas that are federally regulated, like aviation, railways across the country, grain elevators. Anyway, there's a whole number of areas that are exclusively federally regulated, atomic energy, of course. And then everything that happens internationally is up to the federal government. And we need to be doing more internationally. So one of the things you might have heard is Canada is saying, well, we'll give up to $1 billion to help the rest of the world adapt to the changes that we are helping to create. Well, just keep in mind at the same time, the best estimate I've seen is the federal government gave something like $18 billion of tax money to the oil and gas industry in Alberta last year. Well, the whole rest of the world is suffering from climate change. So what would this plan take? We had to have budget. So this is our best guess of over 4 years. What would the provincial government have to put up in money? And it's, little over 16 billion a year. So this is how we would spend it: about 19% on electric vehicles and transportation, but 25% to kickstart the net zero renovations world. I wouldn't expect that to continue because I think, as I say, once it gets going, it'll be self-sustaining. But 23% to help dirty businesses convert and to support the growth of clean tech businesses. 6% on restoring water and nature. I wish it were more. It would have to be more later. And 27% on equity issues, because we have this growing inequality, which really saps the social trust and social cohesion that we're going to need to make the changes that we have to make, and in particular with Indigenous communities. And we can't make the green transition without them, and they're not going to be willing to make it without reconciliation. So a lot of emphasis has to go to that. Where would we get the money from? So this is what our plan says. A quarter of it just from redirecting the current subsidies, which are only producing or almost only producing adverse effects. That's taking money from the taxpayer and giving it to the biggest, most wasteful users of electricity. This is silly. 9% from congestion charges, which will also reduce congestion, clean the air in cities. 13%. So I've suggested we should have a dedicated adaptation fund. Under cap and trade, one of the problems was there was no money for adaptation. All the money was to go to mitigation. And that created a lot of problems and complaints. And we have a report from the Insurance Bureau of Canada and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities that municipalities already are incurring billions of dollars in damages due to climate and need 5.3 billion a year across the country. So about 2 billion in Ontario every year already just to cope. And so this is the adaptation levies. We would stop most fossil fuel subsidies except for farmers and fly-in Indigenous communities. We'd have green bonds to fund the climate bank, a 1% climate surcharge on the top 10% of earners, some extra government, federal government funding, and a business carbon fee. So that's basically where we come from. So that's the best I could do putting this plan together, but we know it can be better. And so that's the next question is, how can it be better? How can we get people engaged? How do we make it real? And we'd love to have feedback. You can give feedback party. You can find the plan at gpo.ca/climate. You can email feedback to climatefeedback@gpo.ca. You can find me. I tweet it at Dianne Saxe, or you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can email me, or I have a website. Well, that's my campaign website. And thank you very much. We're glad to take questions.
Thank you so much, Dianne. I think that you've given us a ton of information here, and I know I have a full 2 pages of notes and a lot of questions myself in terms of some of the things that you've mentioned here that I'm hoping we can unpack a little bit more after the break. But thank you so much for putting this together. I think it really does give us a clear picture of the state of things in Ontario in particular. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to some of the questions that have already come in and talking through some of those. And I really do encourage anyone to, if you have a question, drop it into the chat. If this is your first time with us and you're on a computer, you just hover to the bottom of your screen and the chat function will pop up and you just click on it. And then there will be an opportunity to type questions into the chat. If you're on an iPad, that'll be in the top right-hand corner of your screen. So please do take a moment to drop a comment or a question into the chat while we head into our break here. And we'll do our best to get through as many of those as possible in our time together after the break. So it is just now 20 to 11. So we are going to take just a 10-minute break to go and grab a cup of coffee and just pull our thoughts together. And then we will definitely come back together in just 10 minutes. So at 10:50 and continue the conversation here with Dianne Saxe. I can't wait, Dianne. Thanks so much for putting this together today. We'll be back very shortly.
So 15 minutes, right?
Actually 10. I think we've got too many questions for you, Dianne. So we'll just limit it to 10.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you all here in 10 minutes. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you had a chance to grab a cup of coffee. I know that we have some really great questions here in the chat, Dianne, and so I'm going to try and bring them together so that we have a chance to address as many of those as possible as we continue our conversation here with you this morning. And I just want to say, you know, I feel like personally, I really feel like I've been inundated with so much in the news lately about the climate crisis. And for me, it's just been a really good morning to be able to sit down and take some time to absorb some of the factual information that you're giving us and some of the potential for what we can be working on in the future. So I really thank you for taking the time to put that together in such a coherent way for us, you know, with all of the background research that goes into that too, that I know isn't always visible in a graph or a slide.
You're most welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so as we head into this this second half, as I said, for those of you that are just joining us for the first time, what will happen at this point is that I will attempt to take the questions that are in the chat and pose them to our speaker in a way that are connected, that is connected with each other. And so please forgive me any fault for the questions being a bit, misinterpreted, and that process falls on me. And I always encourage people, if you have any questions at all or any concerns, or just want to continue the discussion, please do reach out to me. You can find me by Googling Linda and Lakehead. Then you'll find my personal address, but you will also be able to contact us always through cell@lakeheadu.ca. Also, Dianne, I noticed in the chat you posted your website and some of your contact information too. That's excellent. We always prepare a mail out to go out to all of the people, an email to go out to all of the people to follow up from the lecture. And so if you have anything else, Dianne, that you'd like us to include with that, please do send it along and we'll do that as well. So just to begin, I think, about 3/4 of the way through your presentation, you had a slide with a circle, a graph that indicated that the costs of addressing these issues in meaningful ways are about $65 billion. And so as someone who's not involved in government, and as someone who is listening to this, $65 billion sounds like an extreme amount of money to me. It sounds almost impossible. And I guess my first question then is twofold. Is that impossible? Is it an obscene amount of money? Can we afford to do this? I know you will say we can not afford not to do it, but can we afford to do this? And also a really good question from Janet Harris: what parts of the economy will be better off by lowering those emissions? Are there ways that maybe some of the money, the $65 billion, will also emerge from an economy that is functioning in a more efficient way, or in a better way in other ways too?
Yeah, no, those are absolutely fair questions. So the provincial government spent about $190 billion in the last fiscal year. So this would be an increase of, I guess, about 8% of that. And and yes, of course, we can't afford not to do it. And a lot of it would have a payback. I mean, again, one of the big things we would be doing is investing now so we don't have to keep spending the $16 to $25 billion every single year importing fossil fuels. We know that we're going to be spending much, much more coping with climate chaos. There's all sorts of estimates, but the usual estimate is for every dollar we spend now deliberately, we will save $6. Because if we fail to act, we're going to get pummeled and punished from every conceivable direction. And in addition, it's not as if the old normal was wonderful for everybody. It wasn't. We've got lots and lots of problems that can be better. So, but in terms of the question, what parts of the economy will be better? A lot. Well, first of all, you have to think about health. So anybody who values their health, well, reducing fossil fuels is an opportunity, not a cost. So one of the really useful studies came out of the United States. There's a group of 10 northeastern states that have a carbon trading system in order to reduce their use of coal and electricity. And their study showed that they, for about $1 billion of carbon pricing, they had 1.3 billion in direct economic benefits and 5 billion in financial benefits from improved health. Because any business loses money when the workers are sick, when they miss work unexpectedly, or they miss work unexpectedly because their kid has asthma. People don't shop as much when they're sick. When you have a healthy workforce and healthy customers, everybody makes more money. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you save operating costs. So think about the Elliott Lake General Hospital. They got money again under cap and trade to finally insulate their building and improve their HVAC system. And they ended up saving hundreds of thousands of dollars every year in their operating costs, which they can now put back in patient care. And the estimate that we had at the time was that the hospitals in Ontario were going to be saving $60 billion a year in operating costs as a result of making their buildings more efficient. In terms of the specific new jobs, I mentioned retrofits. That's one of the areas where we have a huge opportunity for direct work. It takes a lot of work in Ontario to make buildings more efficient. That's work that has to be done here. So spending that money here on retrofitting buildings is a better use of money than sending it somewhere else to buy fossil fuels. We also have some interesting evidence. I mentioned my Green Economy Heroes podcast, and I'll try to find the link to that because I'm not using my regular computer and the shortcut doesn't work. But one of the stories that was told to me was from, I think it was Stratford or Belleville, I can't remember, one of the transit on demand systems that's allowed smaller cities to dramatically improve their transit service while saving money. And so they have an off peak, basically nighttime and weekends, electronic service, transit on demand, where the bus picks you up and takes you to the stop closest to wherever you want to go, wherever it is. So you don't have to change buses. And the result was that the travel time for people who had jobs at malls or universities or wherever was cut so much people could take on an extra job or an extra shift. And so they got more income, and the employers got additional staff, and that again increases the economic turnover. So we know that the health benefits themselves are the largest, but then we get the efficiency benefits, and then we get the benefits for people who get around more easily without having to own a car. I mean, right now, of the 10, if you think about dividing the people into by income, the 10% poorest people in Ontario, half of them still have to own cars because they can't get to where they're going. And that's a huge economic burden on them. They would be so much better off, be able to feed their kids better, be able to do all kinds of other things, maybe be able to invest in some education if they didn't have to have the car. They have to have the car because we're not set up to allow people to get around without cars. And that's just a bad social choice. And then we have all the green businesses. So if you are interested in green businesses, my podcast, Green Economy Heroes, I've interviewed over 60 of them already. And we have amazing innovators in Canada, people with all kinds of great ideas who have had a very hard time building their businesses in Canada because, we don't have the structure set up. So HydroStore, world leaders in storing electricity using just air, water, and rock. They're having to, they're getting their big contracts in Australia and California and other kinds of places. We don't tend to support people here nearly enough. So we could be doing much more of that, but we've got the ideas. I mean, Ontario has tremendous potential, for example, in electric vehicles. We have the minerals, we have the mining expertise, we have the financial expertise, we have the project management expertise. We're in one of the best educated populations in North America, in the world, right, in Ontario. So we really could be developing world-leading businesses in those areas, but we have to support them.
So you are talking about, it's interesting in the chat, there's been a couple of comments that I think are really, really great that are acknowledging that the government and our whole society needs to kind of fund a shift in the way that we are thinking about our engagement with these technologies, at the same time as we are taking advantage of government programmings for retrofitting and that sort of thing as well, right? So you're talking about being able to navigate both of those things at the same time as a society, being able to, fund the transition that you're talking about, and then be able to, take advantage of that transition as individuals.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that's been a really big push, I think, both in Orillia and in Thunder Bay has been a move to electric cars. And so I'm going to actually shift to one of our later questions here because you just brought up electric vehicles as one of the things that people can do, and that Canadians might be best placed to do, because we have you talked about in your talk about how we're using a lot of fossil fuels in relation to transportation in Canada in particular, but we're also maybe well suited in our technology to be able to deal with this, to jumpstart this industry. So Marilyn mentioned, I've heard that there are concerns about strip mining in order to create lithium batteries for e-vehicles, and there is not a solid system for disposing and recycling those batteries. Are we creating a new problem? And can you talk about that in relation to maybe not only electric vehicles, but maybe also other industries as well? Are we far enough ahead in our technologies to implement these things?
So, I mean, that's a great question. And of course, you get two parts. One part's about mining and one part about end of life. So again, I mentioned we have so many incredible innovators in Canada. And one of the ways we're leading the world is exactly on lithium ion battery recycling. So if you check out my podcast, you'll hear I had an interview with AJ, the head of, oh gosh, what's the name of the company? I think it's LION, the lithium ion batteries. And he has developed, I think, the world's first really good commercial system for doing exactly that, for taking the lithium back out of lithium ion batteries and using it again, and the many other really valuable components that are in batteries. We absolutely do have to have a circular economy for everything that we use. And one of the good things about an electric economy as opposed to a fossil fuel economy is we use less stuff. We use different stuff, but in total we use less stuff. And that means we can have a lower total impact on the natural world. Certainly mining for any material, extraction of any raw material from the earth entails risk, and very often entails widespread destruction. You just have to go and fly over northern Alberta if you want to get a sense of that. And then of course there's the pollution that can be left behind, and you can go to any number of mining sites in Canada, and the giant mine in Yellowknife has got enough arsenic, I'm told, to kill every human in the world. You'll be delighted to know that we're spending $1 billion of tax money to try to keep that refrigerated for a century in the hope that our great-grandchildren will have a better way of dealing with all this arsenic we've left for them. So mining creates problems for sure. Resource extraction creates problems, and we have a whole series of issues as to how we become more responsible, more respectful, and dramatically reduce what we need to take from the natural world. And then, but this whole business of taking stuff, using it once and then throwing it away, this is craziness. There isn't any away, and we need to stop that.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. And I think I'm seeing certainly a shift in that within our own communities. I know here we had a repair cafe, and even that small thing, it's no small thing, it took a lot to organize, but just that idea that I should take my toaster and have someone have a go at fixing it, even though it only costs $20 to buy a new toaster, it sort of is as much about fixing the toaster right now as it is about fixing my mindset, which tells me it's just easier to go and get something new, right? So yeah, I appreciate that that's a more than just a way of doing a single thing, but a way of thinking about society in general.
Right, and if I can say just a bit more about vehicle batteries. So the other thing is that vehicle batteries are optimized for a power to weight ratio because you're lugging them around in a vehicle. So that gradually degrades over time, although batteries are improving and they are degrading slower and slower and have got a longer cycle capacity. But eventually they reach the point where you don't want them in the vehicle anymore. But the answer is not at that point to throw them away or even to send them to LION to be recycled. The answer at that point is use them for stationary storage. Because if you take a bus battery or a whole batch of car batteries and you put them on a cement pad somewhere, well, then it doesn't matter anymore how much they weigh. And they can provide tremendously useful backup electricity storage. And in fact, there's good reason to think that by 2030, a lot of the electricity peak storage that we're going to need can come from vehicle batteries, including those still in cars. So bidirectional charging is very important. Another way to think about this is how to finance electric buses. So what I've seen in some places is electrical utilities, they buy the batteries, they rent them to the bus company for 3 years or 5 years or whatever makes sense, and then they take them and use them for their own storage. So that avoids the upfront capital cost for the bus company. They just pay rent as they go, and guarantees that the electricity company will have a already partly paid storage solution by the time that the solar and wind build up enough that they need it. So there's a lot of different ways of rethinking how do we get what we need while minimizing our footprint on the natural world.
That's really interesting. I think there needs to be some energy put into a lot of those new models too, and taking the time and finding the time to think those ideas through. Are there things that we've done historically that maybe we could be using in different ways today that might make more environmental sense within our new world system? So we've got a couple of questions here. Anne is asking about, we used to do a lot of our mass transportation of products on trains. Why can't we do that again instead of having all of these trucks on the road? What do you think about that?
Good idea. Let's do it.
Okay. We've got a couple of other ideas that have popped up in the chat. So let's talk about some of those. Valerie says that she wants to know if it's true that a quarter of the power is lost in transmission. And should we then redesign the grid for shorter transmission? And in this case, what about her bullfrog power system that she's bought into? Does that actually make a difference? I know you were talking about your podcast. Have you done anything with that organization?
Yes, I'm pretty sure I've had bullfrog on. I'm almost certain I've had bullfrog on. So my understanding of transmission losses is that they're usually more like 3 to 5%. They still matter for sure. My bigger concern about transmission is vulnerability. So as the climate chaos increases, we are going to see more and more of the kinds of storms that can bring transmission lines down. So the vulnerability, you think about the city of Toronto, where we only have 25% of the electricity generation that we need in the city, and we are primarily dependent on long distance transmission lines. That makes the city highly vulnerable, and given the importance of the city to the economy of the province, makes the province highly vulnerable in ways that we really haven't prepared for. The solar panels that sit on my roof don't have transmission lines, right? The power goes into the house. I mean, a little bit goes into the grid, but by and large, it just powers my house. So one of the advantages of having solar on roofs is you have more resilience. You have, if you think about Texas, the terrible destruction that they had this winter with the extreme cold weather, and so many houses, the pipes froze and then leaked, and then so you've got massive destruction for many, many people for long periods of time. Well, the people who had solar and their own batteries, they were fine. So increasingly, that's valuable, to have some self-sufficiency. It's one of the reasons that I'm really pleased to have the solar panels on my roof. I'm hoping eventually to add more. And when I tell my kids they've got to be thinking about emergency preparation, their answer is, we're just coming to your house. You've got food, you've got water, you've got a source of heat, and you've got solar panels, which is a fair point, but they should still be doing something.
I think I might be coming to your house too at this point. But it is certainly something that we've started thinking about it in my own home as well, is how, and I think too, how can we be part of a larger system that might contribute back into the power supply and not just be self-sufficient, but really thinking about that system in new ways. Joanne has a question here about clean hydrogen, which I actually don't know very much about. She says, can you comment on clean hydrogen and the possibility of using existing pipelines to deliver it as an interim move away from fossil fuels? So, but again, using what we already have in new ways.
Right. Well, and thank you for asking that. And certainly I've thought about that. So hydrogen, there's a whole range of colors that are used these days to describe different ways of making hydrogen with different kinds of carbon footprints. You've probably heard about blue and gray and green, but there's also turquoise. And anyway, there's a whole bunch of colors these days. The gist is that most of the hydrogen that's made today is what they call gray. They make it from natural gas. It has huge climate pollution. It's certainly not a solution of any kind. And if you put it into pipelines, there's a couple of problems. If you put in more than a small amount of it, you embrittle the pipeline. And also because hydrogen is a very small molecule, it tends to leak. So it's hard to keep it in the pipeline. But you certainly can put some in. I've heard you could put 2% hydrogen fairly easily into pipelines. However, that's probably not a very good use of hydrogen. There are lots of other reasons we're going to need hydrogen. If you think about steel making, for example, the only way that I've heard of, the practical way to get the enormous emissions out of steel is to use hydrogen. There are a lot of industrial uses where you need really high temperature, which is more easily achieved with hydrogen than with electricity. You think about long distance transport, big heavy trucks, probably hydrogen makes more sense for them than batteries just because of the weight of the batteries, at least so far. So the bottom line is that we wouldn't want to waste hydrogen in heating houses because we've got better ways to heat houses. Another thing, though, that is really important for hydrogen is as electricity, this medium-term, longer-term electricity storage. So when we say green hydrogen, we mean hydrogen that's made without polluting. And generally that means you're using extra clean electricity. Well, we would have that if we follow our plan, build lots more wind and solar, keep operating the nuclear, then a lot of the time, even though we're going to be working hard to even out our demand, because that's really important too, we are still going to have more electricity than we need. What do we do with the extra electricity? The easiest thing to do with that extra electricity, and we can store some of it in holes in the ground with the hydrostores method, which is really, really cool. They dig a big hole in the ground. They put water in the hole. They put basically a cover under the water, and you pump the air under the water. And then when you have extra electricity, you pump more air in, it pushes the water up. And when you need electricity, you let the water squish the air back out through a turbine. So we do have other ways of storing electricity, but that works for a number of hours. Right? You can do it cost effectively for 10 hours, 20 hours. You can't do it cost effectively for a month. Whereas when you need to have large volumes stored that could have to run for weeks, hydrogen can do that. And we could store it in salt caverns, and we've got the salt caverns. I think there was more to the question than that. Anyway, the bottom line is there's lots of things we can do with green hydrogen. It is becoming less and less expensive all the time. There is tremendous interest around the world, but most of what you hear about the gas companies pushing is ways to allow them to keep using fossil gas, and that they should be the ones making the hydrogen and being paid by government to do that. And I think that's all a really bad idea. The emissions from that kind of process are really high. And it's a way of extending their profits, not a way of getting us to cleaner air and net zero emissions at the least possible cost.
So you spent, I mean, in that answer, there's also the underlying issue of quantity and, the amount of geographical space that you're talking about implementing this over and all of that sort of thing. There's been a couple of comments in the chat about what to do in terms of smaller communities in Canada and maybe isolated Indigenous communities as well, in terms of what might be the best green energy solution for those communities. And in fact, Bill mentioned that the Minister of Natural Resources, former Minister of Natural Resources, was talking about small nuclear plants for isolated areas. That's a no. Okay, what do you think would work, and how do we support the development of infrastructure in those smaller communities?
Well, we support Indigenous clean energy and climate leadership. there is a wonderful group called Indigenous Clean Energy, and I'd certainly encourage you to check out their website. And what we're seeing is more and more Indigenous communities, they don't want to hear the diesel going thump, 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 thump all day long. They don't want to be vulnerable as the ice roads melt. They don't like the stink. They don't like the cost. And they are increasingly putting in local power. Now, the ones I've interviewed on my show so far have all been solar. Even on Haida Gwaii, one of the rainiest places in the entire world, the community center now has solar on it, and it's saving them money. And the local people are really, really excited to be able to learn how to do it themselves. In Manitoba, more than 1/2 of the certified geothermal installers are First Nations. And that's been done without a penny of government grants through a program called LEC Energy. And I did have them on the show where they have been, basically they got investments from foundations, and they get paid back a little bit from the energy savings, but mostly because they're getting people off welfare. So you get people who didn't have a path to employment, give them supportive education, basically they go from being losers to winners in their communities, that they can make the lives of their neighbors better and produce a steady income and have a skilled trade that they can then carry to the other communities around them. It's just a tremendous program. In terms of what is the actual best source of energy for each community, it's different in different places. In some places they have a local small hydro makes sense. They've got local run-of-river hydro that they can build. Everywhere in Canada, solar makes some kinds of sense, but some places wind makes more sense, and some places they're looking at biomass and other things. The main thing that they need is they need some local. They need a mini grid with some backup. So one of the communities that I interviewed on the podcast is a Gull Bay First Nation. They obviously have a proper Indigenous name that I'm not going to be able to pronounce without having practiced it ahead of time. But they were flooded. So their community was flooded by Ontario Hydro for, I think, 80 years without them getting electricity. They were just ignored, and the dams were put in to provide water control for people in the south, but they didn't run a power line to them. Their cemeteries were flooded. They had to paddle out after the bodies to bring them back. I mean, they were treated as garbage. And they finally got some reparations payments a few years ago, and they used that money to put in a solar system. And just listen to the pride that they have and how extraordinary it is to have silence in the community. They don't have to have the diesel going all the time, how proud their young people are of it. It's really kickstarted a whole new movement for their community.
Absolutely. And we'll send out some information after this lecture too. One of the people that I've been following a little bit who is doing some really amazing work is a woman, an Indigenous woman named Melina. I can't remember her last name right now, but she's with Sacred Solar, and they are doing.
Yes, I emailed her yesterday.
So she's wonderful and really inspirational, and really interesting to listen to, because she brings together that Indigenous worldview with some of the issues that are related to energy use and to the work that they're doing at Sacred Solar. So it's just, yeah, she's doing some really important work. I think there's so many people in our country who are doing such great work in these areas, including yourself, of course.
Well, thank you. One other resource on that point, if you like, is I've been doing a series of climate action webinars and seminars at Massey College. So if you go to Massey College, go to the Our Work section, go down to climate, you'll see that in September, I think it was September, I did a session on Indigenous voices in climate action. And so I had 3 really great speakers, one of whom was Chief Patrick Mitchell of the Canada Bar Band, talking about how it has transformed his community. And they have no children in care. They don't have the kinds of social problems that other First Nations have. And this is, he believes, as a result of the deliberate choice they've made to follow a climate positive path.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, in this series, we will also hear from a local activist named Vicky Meneg, and she is going to speak to these issues as well. And I really wanted to make sure that that we had her come and talk to us here, because she just has so many interesting connections to the land, both in Simcoe County, but also some work she has done in Thunder Bay. So I'm excited about that too. Okay, so let's end today with a bit of a bigger question. So, and by the way, I'm particularly impressed with your ability to just address all of these related issues in detail. But this is a big question. Lois has mentioned in the chat that surely the elephant in the room is the Ontario government's lack of action. I think I've read some recent criticism in the news too, that Canada has a lot of really great plans, but that we don't always follow through on those plans. You've mentioned today a couple of times where the target is X and we're sort of doing maybe half of X at this point. And as you're saying, it's not enough. Lita in the chat asks, what is your opinion about the climate summit that is going on right now, COP26? What do you hope will come out of it? Do you feel like this particular summit is going to be the place where we move from addressing a climate crisis and having plans to address a climate crisis to true climate action? What are your hopes for that? And what do you think we can do to stay involved?
Well, I mean, your first point was about the Ontario government. It's absolutely true that almost everything the Ontario government has done on energy, environment, and climate has been destructive and continues to be destructive. The 413 highway would be an extraordinarily active environmental vandalism. It would create massive sprawl. It would worsen congestion. It would lengthen commutes. We already have in the GTA some of the worst commutes in North America, worse than Los Angeles, worse than New York City. It would lock people into a high carbon lifestyle in a way that would be very difficult to recover from. It would destroy irreplaceable farmland, which is increasingly going to be needed to grow food, as crops are already being heavily damaged around the world. The climate vandalism of these people never ceases to amaze me. And the whole idea of putting a nuclear plant in a remote First Nation that is having trouble keeping its water system running is breathtakingly irresponsible. Aside from the fact we don't have anywhere to put the waste. But the larger question, so we still have, as humans, a small window. When you think about a metaphor, imagine being on an escalator, and at the top there's a raging fire. We really don't want to walk into that raging fire. It'll be incredibly painful and difficult if we to go into that fire. So we want to get off the escalator. If we had decided to get off the escalator when the whole world knew we were on it, which was in the 1980s, or let's say as late as 1992, it would have just been a step. If we tried to get off the escalator 10 years ago, it would have been a really big step, but we could still have done it. I mean, we're at the point now where it's a pretty big jump. It's a scary jump to get off the escalator right now. You might break something, but we'll survive it. But we're not getting off. We're still on the escalator. It's still going up. The fire ahead of us is getting bigger and bigger. We can feel the flames. We can hear the embers, and we're still not getting off the escalator. So, and we've got our kids with us and our grandchildren. They don't have a way to get off because they're not in charge yet. So we know what's at stake. We've been told and told and told and told and told and told and told. We have the technology. We know what to do. And, you know, I showed you some of the examples, and nothing that I showed there was magic. I don't think we should bet the planet on magic. And the great news is we don't have to bet the planet on magic, is that a lot of the work that's been done, I mean, the the investments made by the Obama administration in clean energy, those have paid off, as that we have so many technological options now. The investments the Germans made in renewable energy, the $50 billion the Chinese put into taking over solar manufacturing of the world and making it cheap. I mean, those have all paid off in this extraordinary collapse in the cost of renewable energy and storage. It's gone down faster and faster and faster than anybody really thought possible, even 5 years ago, and continue to fall. Batteries, all these things which are getting cheaper and cheaper and better, faster and faster. So we do have the tools, we just have to pick them up. Are we going to do it? Well, I mean, that's why I'm deputy leader of the Green Party. It's, you know, I don't feel that I can just sit back. The worst of the damage has occurred during my working lifetime. It's happened on our watch. It happened for our benefit. Those people my age, we've reaped all the benefits of all this fossil fuels. We've had really good lives. And our kids are paying the price. They're going to pay much bigger prices. So it seems to me we owe them to do everything we possibly can to clean up our mess. How many times do we tell them to clean up their mess? Well, this is our mess. And it's now primarily a public action problem. When the premier gets booed, he does different things. When we vote different politicians, we get different things. I am running for the legislature, which I do not want to do. I am an introvert. This is not my thing. Because I feel an obligation to do everything that I have to do, that is possible for me to do. And I think that's the same for everybody else. No one can do everything. Everyone can do something. Yes, the government and Shell likes to say, okay, well, what are you doing, right? Make it your problem and your guilt. But we do have to do what we can do personally. But this is not a problem that can be solved by personal choices. And the personal choices that are available to us are determined primarily by political action. Is there a safe way to bike to work? Is there a place to charge an electric vehicle if you get to work? Are electric vehicles for sale in Ontario? Well, they're basically not, because Ford canceled all the incentives and support for it. It's public choices, public infrastructure that set the table from which individuals can act. And blaming individuals while taking away the tools it's greenwashing, and we shouldn't allow it. So the one thing that Canadians find hard to do is to speak up about issues and keep speaking up about them. And Canadians tend to assume that if we know something, everybody else knows it. And that if something needs to be said, somebody else has said it. And besides, somebody in charge will probably deal with it. And none of those things are true. If we want this better world, which we could have, it's right there. And it would be so much better for us in so many ways. We have to demand it. We have to speak up for it everywhere. Where you bank, terribly important. And basically all the banks are subsidizing fossil fuels. The credit unions are better. So wherever you buy things, are you asking about this? At your university, are you asking about this? Wherever you are a participant, you have a voice. Wherever you're spending money, you have a voice. And so we can't be quiet. We're in trouble, and our kids are in trouble. So we owe them.
I really appreciate that. I think your comment there about how, you know, we tell our kids to clean up their mess, and now we need to wade into it ourselves and be vocal about it and participate and find those ways to take action with our votes, with our dollars, with the way that we lead our lives. Those things are so important. And it's so interesting. I know I'm right in the midst of the telling my kids to clean up their mess, right? That's what happens when you have a 6 and 8 year old. But I read an article recently that said, if you really want to motivate your kids to clean up the mess, sometimes they don't see it in front of them when they don't see the mess the way we do as parents, right? So if you really want them to truly get into cleaning up their mess, you should pile all of the stuff that is a mess in the middle of the room so they can see it, and then they'll start to put it away. And so just as I was listening to you there, I thought, and I've tried this and it does work actually. But I really think, we're getting a comment here. It's hard work to clean up this mess. Absolutely, it's hard work. But I feel like right now we can all see the pile. We can see that this is a real problem now, and we can see it we can certainly see it through your presentation today. And my hope is, as we continue this conversation over the next 4 weeks, that we will find those meaningful ways to lean in and pick up some pieces and be part of putting away the mess, part of being involved in ways that for each of us, those ways will be different. But you've outlined some potential for us to begin that process and begin that journey if we're not already started in that direction already. So thank you so much, Dianne. It's been a great experience to speak with you today.
Well, thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. A couple of times Dianne mentioned Seth Klein's book. So this is exciting because next week we are going to welcome Seth Klein to come and talk to us about the work that he is doing, and also about the book that you mentioned, Dianne, which is called A Good War. And in fact, his premise in that book is that we as Canadians, we can do this. We can fight the climate crisis because we have shown that we have those skills in the way that we leaned into and fought World War II. And so I'm really looking forward to that discussion next week. The book is an amazing one. I know it's available locally in Orillia and in Thunder Bay, and really throughout the country if you're joining us from other places. So I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday, where we'll continue the conversation. And I encourage all of you to pull out your warmer clothes. I know it feels like winter snuck up on us here, but I'm hoping everyone will get a chance to get outside today. And maybe you'll even run into one of our fellow community members here and have a chance to have a little chat about the things that we're learning here through Third Age Learning Lakehead, wherever you are. I look forward to seeing all of you again next Wednesday. And thanks to Dianne. And thanks most of all to all of you for coming and taking part in this conversation. I've heard from so many people right now that people are exhausted. And I think that this is a big, serious issue that we're tackling together. And I'm glad that you've chosen to open up your minds to more of a discussion about this topic, because I think it's absolutely important to our communities. So thank you so much for being here. And I'll see you again next Wednesday, 9:30 in the morning, where we'll be talking to Seth Klein. See you then, everyone.